Okay, well, good morning. So let's begin. Today we'll be doing our balance sequence. So our peak pose will be Bakasana crane pose, and I'll just hopefully offer some ways to make this more accessible. It can be a tricky pose for some of us, so hopefully that will help. But first, we'll start with centering. So come into your centering posture, whatever is best for you. For this particular sequence, it says to start in Sukhasana, easy pose, so that's cross-legged, but I like child's pose. You might like Virasana. So whatever pose works best for you to get centered. Taking a few moments to get all settled in, and even closing the eyes. And while we're here, taking some time to become present. And what does that really mean? It just means most of us spend a lot of our time thinking about the past or preparing for the future in some way. So taking a moment to feel the floor beneath you. Maybe you can feel the texture of your yoga mat on your legs and feet. And other things that bring you to the present, maybe just noticing the temperature of the air on your skin. Does it feel a little chilly this morning, or is it quite warm? No judgment, just noticing, checking in with our environment. And that also means checking in with ourselves. How are we feeling this morning? Often we're rushing around, so you might feel a little flustered or a little anxious, or maybe you've had a fantastic morning and you're feeling really exhilarated. Again, no judgment. All human emotions are valid emotions, just checking in. And sometimes during centering practice, I like to think about what this practice will be. And today's focus is balance. And they say what happens off the mat carries forward onto the mat. So if we aren't very balanced in our daily lives, we might have some struggles on the mat. But not to fear. We can work it all out on the mat too. But how? And one way I like to do that is just feeling balanced on the mat. Right now, I'm in the right place at the right time. This time is just for you. And taking some time for your yoga practice is finding balance in your world. Maybe taking a moment to feel steadiness. And slowly open the eyes. Notice I took a little extra longer centering practice for our balance class. It's not my strong point. Let's head into hands and knees, and it's taking a moment on hands and knees. So for me personally, for balance postures, especially Bakasana crane pose where we will be balancing on our hands, I like to warm up my hands. So in your hands and knees, just a few little organic movements. So a little side to side maybe, little forward and backward, nice and gentle. So again, for me, I don't know about you guys, but I think my wrists are a little tight, I think. So a little forward, a little backward, a little side to side, just gradually placing some weight on the hands, getting the wrists and hands warmed up. And then we'll head up and back to a downward facing dog. So tuck the toes under, hips press up and back. And then same thing again, a few little organic movements. Maybe that's walking the dog. So that would be one heel pressing down gently towards the mat as the opposite leg bends. And then switching sides. That's one kind of organic type movement I like to do. There's another one that I like, which is shifting hips side to side, nice and slow. It tends to transfer the stretch to the outside of the legs instead of the backs of the legs, or I suppose in addition to. Especially that first downward facing dog. I like to get a little shoulder stretch in there too, as the heart reaches towards the feet. And then scoop the belly in, and we'll head back to hands and knees. So same thing, just some organic movements. If you're like, I don't really know what to do, you can do circles. That way you get all of it. So you can circle one way, maybe 4 or 5 circles, and then circle the other direction, 4 or 5 circles. I'm doing that myself and just switching sides here or switching directions. And then we'll head back to downward facing dog. So tucking the toes under, hips press up and back. And the sequence today is in lieu of vinyasa, or instead of vinyasa, non-vinyasa style. But still taking a couple of the elements of sun salutations like our downward dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. For those of us learning Sanskrit. So same again, maybe for that second downward facing dog. First, maybe 2 or 3. I like to do those organic movements. Feeling the stretch. A little bit in the Achilles, a little bit in the calves, a little bit in the hamstrings. And then scoop the belly in. Last round, we'll do hands and knees, so same thing again, just some organic movements to feel a little bit of a stretch in the wrists, and a little bit of weight into the hands. Maybe it's side to side, maybe it's front to back, maybe it's circles, whatever feels right. And then last time, downward dog. So tuck the toes under and pressing the hips up and back. So maybe some organic movements again, or maybe you're like, no, I just want to hold. Whatever your body needs in your down dog at this moment. And then once again, gently lower through hands and knees. And then all the way to some kind of comfortable seated position. So from here, a few wrist stretches. So we sort of were warming up the wrists a little bit, but there's a couple of wrist stretches that I really like to add to my practice, especially when doing balance postures. So again, the legs doesn't matter where they are. Any position that works. But the first one is a stretch for the fingers. So we place the hands onto your mat and then lift the palms so that you're feeling that stretch in the fingers. Be really careful though, we don't want to overstretch. I mean, you never want to overstretch anything, but just sort of a little caution that the fingers, those muscles are pretty little in there. And we just hold. We're not here too long. And then slowly release, nice and slow, taking a second, maybe some organic movements. And then the next one is for the forearms and the backs of the wrists. So we want to bend at the wrist so that the backs of the hands will reach the floor really gently. So same thing again, these muscles aren't a lot bigger than the fingers. So nice and gentle. Slowly the backs of the hands will rest on the floor. If you've got a lot of mobility, you could even bend through the elbows, but do be cautious. And just hold in this rather awkward position. So if you're like, this is really awkward, am I doing it right? Yes. And in fact, most times in yoga, if you're like, this feels great, you might want to reconsider your alignment. Most yoga poses have some element of awkwardness to them. Last few moments. So again, just really gentle stretch. And then slowly, slowly, slowly release some organic movement. Some people like to shake out the wrists after that. I do not. Shaking them out, I feel like would be too much. For me, I like to just sort of move my hands around in no particular order. And then heading into our last stretch in this series. So it's the exact opposite of the last one. So palms facing up and then fingertips to the floor. And then we're trying to get our whole palms onto the floor. So again, you can move your legs around to wherever works best. I find just sort of sitting back on my heels works best. And then if you have more flexibility, you can either head backwards or bend through the elbows, or both. This particular stretch, actually this whole series, is really good preparation for advanced yoga. So if you're considering sticking around with yoga for long enough to get into more of the poses like our crane pose today and beyond, preparing the wrists for balancing is ideal, right? Sort of at the beginning of your yoga journey or wherever you're at in your yoga journey. Last few moments. Okay, just a tiny bit longer. Side note for teachers, this particular stretch, you might notice I don't have my timers for. I listen to my body for this one, and that's what I'm hoping you all can learn as you build your home practice. And that's listening to your body. So for this particular stretch, what I'm waiting for is a cue from my body. So, and now I'm just now starting to feel that. So when I start a stretch, it feels rather intense. Let's slowly, slowly, slowly come on out. And then what happens, so same thing again, just some organic movements as you come out. And once I'm in a stretch for like 20 seconds or so, then I can feel my body kind of go, oh, like it just sort of, that was a weird movement, but like it feels like it exhales, kind of like my body's like, okay, she's in this weird position on purpose for some reason. I guess we will release a little bit. And so then at that point, I feel like the stretch is now beginning. So at that point, then I'll keep talking, but I'll get us into a next stretch here. Let's head into downward facing dog and feeling a stretch in the backs of the legs. So after I've been there for 20, 30 seconds, my body does a little release. Then I feel like the actual stretch is starting. And it's usually about a minute or so. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, depending on the position. And it feels like the stretch is kind of completing. And then it moves from this feels like I'm finding the edge, not pushing past it. But then there's a moment where it's like, it's all done. It's like an oven goes ding, and anything held beyond that feels like it's diminishing returns. And so that's when I tend to come out of a stretch in my home practice. I don't necessarily use a timer. And then gently lower through hands and knees. And then we'll head into hero pose or thunderbolt. So thunderbolt is simply sitting back onto the heels, and it just depends on your knee flexibility and ankle flexibility. If you're like, this feels like nothing, actually first, if this feels like, yeah, this is stretching, then stay here. And if you're like, no, this doesn't stretch at all, then we move into hero pose virasana. And that's with the knees together, but we step the feet apart and then sit either on a block or between the feet, or if you're like, oh, sitting on my heels isn't a stretch, but sitting between the feet is too big of a stretch, use a folded up blanket. I have one sort of a sample just in front of me, or a block behind you, and elevate the hips. So you want to have for this one a very, very mild stretch. So we're stretching ligaments here. Well, we're stretching both ligaments and muscles, but the knees, we're stretching ligaments. So they don't like to stretch very quickly. Muscles do. Muscles can give a little fairly quickly, but knees don't. So we want them to feel just a mild stretch for longer. We hold longer. But the reason we're in this pose right now is kind of for the ankles. So anyone who doesn't have a very high arch, that was me using my hands as feet, like, you know, high arch, like ballerinas do, this will feel like an intense stretch. So for this class, which is focused on balance, the ankle flexibility is actually really important, because when we stand up to do poses like, spoiler alert, Vrikshasana tree poses coming up, what we want to do is have the foot and the ankle do a lot of the balance. So when we're there, I'll talk about how we sort of feel the little rocking motion between the big toe side of the foot and the pinky toe side of the foot, and that all happens in the ankle. If our ankles aren't very mobile, then we're going to be kind of wavering up top, and you'll feel your core start to work more. And it's always good to work your core, but if your motivation is actually to increase balance, you want the foundation to take most of the stability. So we'll hang out here just a little bit longer if that's okay, but of course you can come out at any time where if your knees are speaking to you, or your ankles and saying it's time, like that sort of sensation I just spoke about, then by all means come on out. Otherwise, last, let's say 15 seconds or so. And it's nice to tune in. So I'm just taking a moment to feel my knees, my own knees. So for me, because all I can really talk about is my own personal experience, I feel a very mild stretch in the knees, but I can also feel that I'm not at my full range of motion. So what happens is there's a feeling of it sort of releases, and then that's sort of done for the moment. I don't know how else to explain that. And then from here, we'll head up and back to downward dog. So take your time. Sometimes it feels weird in the knee area when we come on out. So take your time, take your time. I like to move like I'm 108, nice and slow. And then tuck the toes under, hips go up and back. And then that should feel like a really nice stretch here. And then we'll head back to seated once more. So gently lowering through hands and knees and all the way to seated. And then the next little exercise, I love this one. This is actually not from yoga. It's from back in my ballet days, but it helps yoga a lot. So sitting in Dandasana staff pose where the feet are forward, all we're doing is ankle circles. So I like to go outwards first, so the toes go out, and then they go down, and then they go in, and then they go up. And then you just keep going. You can lean back on your hands, just get comfortable, and then just keep going. So this one, same thing, I don't usually time it so much, but I'm trying to feel when my ankles start kind of burning. That feeling of, oh yes, they're getting fatigued now. So just keep going. And this will help balance as well, a lot. So if you throw this into your practice, not every day necessarily, but over time, if you do this one even just once a week, over a year, you will find your ankle strength increases greatly. And relax. So I just started to feel a little bit of fatigue there. Sometimes it's nice to go until you're feeling really fatigued, but in the spirit of saving a bit of time today, just a little bit of a small fire, and then other directions. So toes go in and down, out and up, and keep going. And of course, this spills over into off the mat as well. So if you play soccer, if you walk in high heels, any activity where there's a risk of rolling over the ankle, this helps prevent that. Your ankles will get stronger, so that just won't happen. And if it does, they'll be flexible, so it won't strain anything. So that's nice too. Injury reduction. All right, that's enough of that. So organic movements. And then we'll head up and back to downward dog. So from hands and knees, hips press up and back to a big V. And then walk the feet forward to the top of your mat. And let's hang out in a forward fold for a few moments. All those down dogs should feel fairly limber in the backs of the legs compared to when we first started class today. And then we'll slowly ragdoll one vertebra at a time, all the way up to standing. And then we'll head into Vrikshasana tree pose that I promised you. So we'll stand on our left foot. Very important to redo the ponytail for some reason. And the right knee tips out to the side. So before I even start, I like to get set up. So what am I doing here? I'm trying to not stand sassy. Somehow that's how I always begin. And then to do that, pull the belly in and push the floor down, right? So we don't want to slump into the hip. We want to lift up and then place the right foot on the leg, just not on the knee, either below the knee or above the knee. So below the knee to start. And if you're like, yeah, I want to give it a go above the knee, we pick up the foot and place it on the inner thigh. So from here, let's bring the hands to heart center. It's the easiest place to find balance first, and then find that stability. So from here, this is where we have that motion of, I can feel I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but I can feel my foot rocking. So I'm kind of rocking side to side between the big toe side of the foot and the pinky toe side of the foot. So I don't feel much movement anywhere else. So from the knee up, I feel pretty stable. My ankle's trying to take that. If I were to just try to keep that locked, I can't hold on to the balance, like I just fall. So give that a go. It was kind of a light bulb moment for me when I realized, oh yeah, that's probably a better way to do balance. And then if you're holding it super steady, raise the arms up because it's harder to balance if you're taller. And if you fall out, no problem, get back in. Maybe the ankle movement isn't enough, right? If your whole hips are off center, it's going to be tricky. So we're in this pose for a little while. So you may need to come out momentarily just because, as you can tell, it's working all sorts of things. I'm feeling my upper leg working quite a little bit. So holding on to it and really just focusing on the ankle. Let the foot rock. And one more inhale to lengthen. And on your exhale, releasing, shaking or rolling out that supporting leg. And there's another side. So here we go, standing on the right, left knee tips out to the side, same thing again. So placing the foot below the knee or above the knee, finding your balance first with hands at heart center. And when you're ready, raise the arms up, but try to find that little rocking motion of the foot. And if it's not enough, then you use your core. While we're here too, obviously finding the alignment will help, right? So thinking of physics, you can't just have your right hip stacked over top of your right ankle or you will tip over, right? Because there's a bit of a kind of a balance scales, right? We need to have an equal amount of weight on the left side of the supporting foot as the right side. So actually I'll just pivot here to face square on a little bit more to the camera. And then, so you might notice my right hip is slightly out of my right foot because my left knee is that way. So what's happening is it's the whole central axis of the body is directly over the foot, right? If I were to be completely over top of the foot, I would fall. Last few moments here. One more inhale to lengthen. And on the exhale, returning to Tadasana mountain pose, shaking or rolling out that supporting leg. Yeah, so balance is a funny thing. I really like to, some people have that physics sort of inherent. It's not for me. I have to really visualize or even sketch it out. Okay, so what body parts are on this side of my foundation, what parts are on that side, and kind of go from there. So let's move into our next balance posture, which is Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, which is a bunch of syllables that means hand to big toe pose. So this is one of my least favorite yoga poses. It looks really pretty, but it's challenging. I find it challenging. So anytime there's a challenging posture coming up, it might not be for you, but for me, it is. I kind of like to give myself a pep talk, like I can do this, I got this. So thinking of strength, rooting through the left foot, what we do is we want the knee to come to us or eventually the foot, but we'll do sort of phase one because I find it hard enough. So the knee lifts up and then we, with the peace fingers, find the big toe. So trying not to slouch, find the big toe, right? So not slouching to pick up the toe. The other thing is don't grab the toe with all of your finger strength. You want the knee to lift itself up. Left hand to the hip, lifting up tall, then extend the leg as much as it'll go. Maybe that's a little bit, maybe it's all the way, doesn't matter. So again, try not to be clasping so much with the fingers. The leg's lifting itself up. That's already, I don't know, like 4. I fell out, and 5 if you're still holding on to it. And then reverse course, so we bend the knee and release. Voila, hand to big toe pose. There's another side. So notice how some poses I hold for a long time. That one I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anyways, so working on hand to big toe pose, we want the left knee to come up to us. So it comes up to us, peace fingers, find the big toe, and then the right hand finds the hip. Here we go. So lifting up nice and tall, it's more important to keep the supporting leg straight than it is to straighten the top leg. So we extend. Maybe it's a little bit, maybe it's all the way for 1. Remember to breathe for 2. Remember the foot rocking motion for 3, 4, and 5. We reverse course and return to Tadasana mountain pose. Okay, moving on. We have Garudasana Prep. I actually really like this one. So it's another balance posture, but there is a bit of a safety element. So we need to discuss first. So Garudasana Prep, Eagle Prep pose is, I'll just do a quick demo first. It's kind of like this, okay? So the safety portion of it is, and I do this still, even though I've been doing this pose for 100 years, I still practice this particular safety portion before I do the pose, just to remind my brain. So what does that entail? Cross the right ankle over the left knee, and then practice falling, releasing the foot, okay? I do that a couple times. I just go, okay, I'm falling, and then I release the foot. What we don't want to happen is you lose your balance and you fall directly down if you don't have the mobility, because that's hard on the knee. So again, if you're gonna fall forward, number one. Number two, release the foot, okay? So, and I don't mean that to scare anyone, it's just a little safety precaution, right? It's always good to have an exit strategy for everything in life. Anyways, right ankle crosses over the left knee. The other thing we wanna make sure is that your supporting knee is directly over the toes, so we don't want it torquing inward or outward. So the supporting leg completely parallel. Top leg is externally rotated, and it's balance. In fact, it's balance and strength. That supporting leg is strong, and it's flexibility. So we're feeling the stretch on our right hip, hopefully. And then eventually you might be able to bring the fingertips towards the floor. Then it becomes less about balance though. So try to, if your fingertips do reach the floor, try not to use the floor as balance, but rather just sort of like hover above. Breathing deep for 3, 4, and 5 to come out. We reverse course, lengthening. Remember to keep the weight forward, because if you fall, you want to fall forward, and then return to Tadasana mountain pose, shaking or rolling out that supporting leg. Okay, other side. I do like that posture. I do like that one quite a bit. So we plant the right foot parallel, completely parallel, and then left ankle crosses over the right knee. Same thing again. I still do, even though we just did it, I don't know. I just want to remind my brain what to do. I think it's smart. And then when you're ready, the ankle crosses over the knee, and then let's bring the hands to heart center. Same thing again. So nice and controlled, find that stretch, and wherever you feel that stretch, just hold. Feel the strength for 2, still breathing for 3, 4, and 5. To come out, we lengthen and reverse course, keeping the weight forward, and return to Tadasana mountain pose, shaking or rolling out that supporting leg. Then we carry on to Garudasana, eagle pose. So that was eagle prep pose, which is actually quite different than eagle. So for eagle pose, I'm trying to think, how much detail do I want to go into this? Let's not do too much. Let's just keep things simple today. So the same thing again with the supporting leg. The supporting leg is parallel. Eagle pose, what we do is we lift up the right leg and we loop it all the way around the left. Okay, so what tends to happen when we do that is the supporting knee turns inward. The job that we're trying to accomplish is internally rotate the top leg, but keep the supporting leg parallel. So all of the action is happening in the top leg. That's really hard to do. So I do see a lot of people doing a little cheat. Not gonna lie, I do that a little bit myself. So supporting leg, but we're supposed to keep it parallel. So let's do that. So keeping it parallel and then wrapping around. Maybe it wraps all the way, maybe not, doesn't matter. Or maybe you just support the toes on the floor beside you. I tend to do that quite a bit too. So then with the arms, once you got the legs going, the right arm underneath the left. And then the right hand moves on the inside of the left hand, and we clasp the palms together. Okay, so we've got the left leg supported. Right leg is wrapped around the left. And we've got the palms, maybe they're together, maybe they didn't make it quite all the way, and that's okay. And we're here for, that's probably 4. And 5. Unraveling and unwinding, returning to a tall mountain, preparing for the other side. So same thing again, that right leg is parallel, left lifts up, wraps around, and the arms, now we have left under right, wrapping all the way around for 1, lifting up tall for 2, remembering to breathe for 3, feeling that ankle movement for 4, and 5. Let's lengthen as we come all the way out back to Tadasana mountain pose. Okay, so then we'll move on to our peak pose, actually, Bakasana crane pose. So for this one, we hike up the pants. I feel like that should be step 1 in our manual. And then we find ourselves in a bit of a squat position with the hands in kind of a plank position. So we want the hands shoulders width apart, if not just a smidgen wider, it makes balance a little bit easier. And then in our squat position, we want to situate the knees as high up on the arms as possible. So eventually the knees are going into the armpits. But for now, what will probably happen is we'll bend the elbows a little bit. And just so you know, it's a bit of a cheat, and it's an okay cheat. Like, it's okay to modify in yoga. In fact, it's encouraged until you get to the proper position. So it's okay to bend the elbows a little bit. Try to keep the knees as high up as possible. Lift the hips as high up as possible. And then here's where we need that wrist flexibility that we were working on earlier. And then where physics comes in, right? Like, so right now, my hips and everything is way on the back side of my center of balance, right? So in order for me to balance, my hips are my center of gravity. So my shoulders are gonna have to be forward if I'm going to balance in this posture. So that means my shoulders need to be beyond my wrists. So not only do I need incredible shoulder strength for this, I also need wrist flexibility and strength. So if you're like, why can't I do this pose? There's like 4 or 5 reasons why. So we need to go there slowly. So one exercise is to situate the knees as high up on the arms as possible, and then we're up on the toes, and I just place more and more and more weight onto the hands, and we hold. Okay, if you can lift all the way up, great, go for that. If not, just hold with the toes on the floor and hold. Breathing deep for 3, 4, and 5. Let's come on out. It was so much fun. We'll give that another go. But take a second. And what we're trying to do is, I was fortunate enough to attend one of Kino McGregor's workshops on arm balancing. I cannot speak highly enough of her. I adore her. And what she said that really helped me was, when you're doing Bakasana crane pose, try to get every body part involved and make them do their own thing. So you're not just sort of like piling everything on top of your wrists and hoping your wrists don't give out. Your legs are lifting themselves up. Your hips are lifting themselves up so that your arms are just holding themselves up and everything else is lifting themselves up. It sure doesn't feel that way when you're doing it. You're like, no, it feels like my wrists are doing everything. But even just that change in thought that, oh, okay, it makes you like pull in your legs more. It just activates, everything activates more and it's easier. So let's try that again with that thought in mind, with Kino's tip in mind. So once again, our hands are shoulders width apart, maybe just a smidgen wider, and then situate the knees as high up as possible. And then your hips are lifting themselves up. Your legs are lifting up. So lift your legs up and hold. Maybe the feet are off the floor, maybe not. For 2, 3, 4, and 5. Didn't that feel better? Some of us might be like, no. But that for me was a turning point, that little tip. All right, let's sit down. So that was the peak pose of this class, the hardest bit. Now we get to move into something really nice, Ardha Matsyendrasana. So this is half Lord of the Fishes pose. This one, unless you have really flexible hips, I recommend a block or a folded blanket or a couple of them. And I like to do this one in 2 parts. So we'll bend the knees with the feet on the floor. Left foot goes underneath the right leg until the left knee, so the knee going under, is pointing directly forward, not out to the side, but the knee is forward and my foot is beside my hip. Then my other leg, so my right leg, it's almost already in the right position. I'm just gonna put it up and over the knee, just on this side of the knee. So this knee is directly above the bottom knee. And I use my hands to get into yoga. This is why I like yoga more than ballet. I don't know if that's true. Ballet is pretty fun too, but you don't have to be graceful, right? You can just kind of like, I don't know, wiggle, move, lift and scooch until you get into the proper position. And then lift up tall. So I like to place both hands on my top knee and then just lift up tall from here. And I like to talk about the legs first before we add the arms. So what's happening here is the bottom leg is externally rotated, right? So my knee, it feels like a little bit of a stretch in this hip as the leg bone inside the hip is externally rotating. My top leg, if it was externally rotated, it would be out to the side, but it's not. It's internally rotating. So I feel a little bit of a stretch in the right hip from that internal rotation. So I find that fascinating. And then we lift up nice and tall with that sort of double motion happening in each hip. Then we add the twist. So the most important thing is to not be slouching. If you're slouching in this position, you don't want to then add a twist. You'll pull something. I could even be more specific about what muscle will overstretch. So we want to be sure that the back is completely straight. If it's not, sit up on a folded blanket or a block, okay? From here, lifting up tall, we want the right hand behind us and then the left arm crosses over and then we twist. But we don't just want to twist sort of willy-nilly. We want to have the twist be nice and even throughout. If not, focusing more on the mid-back. So what we tend to do is the low back does all the twisting and the neck, we crane our head around. What we want to do is emphasize this twist in the mid-back. How do we do that? I like to think about my navel pointing directly forward so my navel isn't twisting. Really think about that mid-back area. So focusing on the mid-back, almost like your back is like a cloth. When you wring out a cloth, the middle portion takes most of the twist, and then the neck and the low back are a mild twist, okay? So I'm not craning my neck around. I'm trying to open my right shoulder. And let's breathe deep for 2, 3, 4, and 5 to come out. Inhale to lengthen, and exhale, unraveling and unwinding. Return to Dandasana staff pose. So the feet are forward, maybe shaking it out a little bit. And then we wrap up onto the other side. So we'll bend the knees, starting with the right foot this time, goes underneath the left so that the foot's near the hip and the knee is pointing forward. I can already feel that stretch. Oh my gosh. Lots of desk sitting. Okay, then the other foot crosses over top. And then same thing again, so holding onto the top knee, double checking that both knees are lining up with the central axis of the body. So my top leg likes to turn out, lifting it up, And then I'm thinking again, okay, so I want my navel to face forward, and it's the mid back. So my left fingertips behind, my right arm crosses over, and it's the shoulders. And again, I'm not leaning back, I'm sitting up nice and tall, so my torso is perpendicular to the earth. And I can even like look down and around to double check. Yeah, am I perpendicular? Yes, I am. You don't even need mirrors or anyone else to tell you. You can just sort of look around. And then once you're there, lifting up tall, breathing deep for 2, 3, 4, and 5. One more inhale to lengthen, and exhale, unraveling, unwinding, and return to Dandasana staff pose. Oh my gosh, we only have super nice ones left. So as we head towards the end of our class, we'll lay all the way back, preparing for Setu Bandha Sarvangasana bridge pose. There's a few different ways you can do this one. You can do an active variation, which I'll recommend today, but if you're like, I'm really feeling tired this morning, Carla, place a block beneath the hips once we get there, okay? And then that'll be a nice bridge pose for today. So we lay all the way back, and then bend the knees, placing the feet on the floor, slightly wider than hips width apart and parallel. So my feet are not too close to the hips, but you know, a comfortable amount. The feet are slightly wider than hips width. Knees pointing up, arms alongside the body, palms facing down. Once we're all square, knees pointing up, placing equal weight into each foot, lift the hips high to the sky, and then trying to create as much space between the floor and your own self as possible. If you are good here, just stay here. If you'd like to go further, interlace the fingers beneath you, and then gently, while still looking up at the ceiling, don't move the neck, tuck the shoulders under one at a time, nice and gentle, nice and slow. And then maybe you can find a little more space between yourself and the floor. Breathing deep. So this is our active variation. You might feel a little bit of a stretch in the front of the legs as well. This pose is so good for us for so many reasons. In yoga, we tend to do a lot of forward folds. So we stretch the backs of the legs a lot. It's really important then to balance that stretch with strength for the health of the muscles. So I like to hold this one slightly longer for that reason. One more inhale to lift the hips a little higher. And on the exhale, very carefully reversing course. So we release the hands, we gently untuck the shoulders, and then slowly lower the hips all the way down to the floor. And then let's hug the knees in. Little rock side to side for Apanasana, knees to chest pose. And then from here, we'll prepare for Ananda Balasana, happy baby pose. So for this one, we clasp onto the outer edges of the feet, if they're available. If not, the ankles or the shins. And then, with the soles of the feet facing the sky, allow the knees to draw downwards towards the floor. So you can gently pull down onto the feet, but really gentle. So we're not trying to reef on the feet, but allow gravity to help this one. That's already 2. Also trying to keep the tailbone on the floor a little bit, keeping the back neutral. That's already 4. And 5. And releasing into Apanasana, hug the knees in, maybe a little rock side to side. And preparing for final resting pose, Shavasana. So if your back needs a little extra support today, feel free to keep those knees bent with the feet on the floor and allow the knees to tip inward. Otherwise, extend the legs and the arms along your sides, palms facing up, and close the eyes. softening everything, everything. But especially through the neck and the shoulders and all the way down the arms, letting the fingers softly curl. Softening through the face, softening around the eyes, and even the muscle between the eyes. Just letting it all go. And starting to come back, wiggle the fingers and the toes and gently roll your head from side to side. Then reaching your arms above head on the floor for a big stretch, feeling totally refreshed. Then bending your knees in one at a time. Gently roll over to the right side and just pause there for a moment as you come back. And slowly start to press yourself all the way up to a comfortable seated position, taking all the time you need. But when you arrive, palms facing up on the knees, inhale, sitting up tall. Exhale, closing the eyes, and taking those final moments to thank yourself for showing up to your practice today and taking care of you. And slowly open the eyes. Namaste, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye.